Bava Batra Daf Pei Daled Amud Beis, the value of age, Yayin v'chometz min echad. David and Hannah Wallace of Kosher Travelers have sponsored this whole week of Matmonim. Thank you so much to you both. I know that you are regular daily listeners of Matmonim and have been since its inception. I appreciate your understanding of how much not only time and effort, also money and resources goes into making these shiurim available worldwide within hours of them being given. And also the website, matmonim.org, where all the shiurim are archived, can be found and listened to, and are being transcribed so that they can be read, and they'll be tagged so that they can be properly indexed. All of this is going to take and is taking significant resources, and I and the team are enormously indebted to you and others who generously contribute, whether to a single shiur or for sponsoring a project or a set of shiurim such as you have done. We appreciate that. Kosher Travelers provide the most amazing vacation opportunities both on Yom Tovim and during the year for people who are concerned about kashrut all over the world, and they always include incredible opportunities for learning and growth. We'll take an interesting angle on aging and the meaning and the value of aging. But we start off with a posuk in Parshas Korach. ואת הלוויים תדבר ואמרת עליהם, כי תיקחו מאת בני ישראל את המעשר אשר נתתי לכם מאיתם בנחלתכם. And you shall speak to the Levim and say to them, when you take the tithe, when you take the maaser that you're allowed to take from Bnei Yisrael, we've got to give the Levim certain portions and pieces. V'haremotem mimenu trumat Hashem, you shall lift out from it a truma, a donation to Hashem, a contribution to Hashem, which is the contribution you, the Levim, get on my behalf. Maaser min ha-maaser, a tenth of the tenth that is taken. And when the Torah talks about Levim, it doesn't only mean Levim, it means the Kohanim as well. The important words in this posuk is v'haremotem mimenu, that you take truma from it. And from which we learn in the Gemara learns from that when you give truma, when you take a portion out of the produce to give to the Kohen or to give to the Levi, it has to be from the same produce that you're going to be consuming. So you can't give the Levi or the Kohen a donation of wine if what you've got is bread, wheat, or whatever. You've got to give from the same material, from the same commodity that you're eating. That's the posuk. What's that got to do with our Gemara? We have a Mishnah, a daf before, on Pei Gimel. Yayin v'nimtza chometz, chometz v'nimtza yayin. If a man sells wine, the contract says, I will deliver 100 barrels of wine. When the buyer opens the shipment, he finds it's vinegar. Or chometz, so he says, I'll sell you 100 barrels of vinegar, and when he opens it, he finds that it's wine. Shnehem yecholim lachzor bahem. Neither is bound by the contract. So this Mishnah talks about all the different situations where what you deliver is not quite what you contracted, and who has the out, who can renege. And in the case of wine and vinegar, either of them can renege because the contract hasn't been fulfilled. What I said I would sell to you, I haven't sold to you. So that's our Mishnah. Yain and chometz, wine and vinegar, two different commodities. We have a brisa that says, Yain v'chometz min echadhu. Yain, wine and vinegar are considered the same commodity. When it comes to trumas and maaser, that brisa is talking about giving truma. Rabbi omer shnei minim. Rabbi says, no, they're two separate ones. So what is the issue? The issue is, I've collected wine, I've harvested my grapes, and I've made wine. And instead of giving the Kohen of my wine, or the Levi, I give him of my vinegar, or vice versa. Can I use the one to pater, to free the other of the obligation of Truma and Maaser? So we have a machlokes, Rebbe and Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say, Yain v'chometz min echadhu. Wine and vinegar are the same commodity. Now that's difficult, of course, because we've just learned that if you contract to sell wine and you deliver vinegar, or vice versa, either party can renege because the contract hasn't been fulfilled. From our Mishnah, it's clear that they're two different commodities. Therefore, our Gemara says, Leima matnitin Rebbe hi v'lo Rabbanan. Our Mishnah must be like Rebbe, who holds that they're two commodities, not like the Rabbanan. The Gemara is assuming that the principle of whether it's one or two commodities applies both in matters of commerce and in matters of giving trumas and maaser. Notice in the Rashbam says, min echadu, when the Rabbanan say it is one commodity, ve'im taram mizeh al zeh trumato truma. Notice the wording in the Ramban, in the Rashbam. And if he gives truma from wine for vinegar, or from vinegar for wine, then the trumato truma, it's a valid truma. The Rashbam is clearly saying that's b'di'evid. If you did it, then it's done. But not that lechatchila, not that it's the right thing to do. To give wine for vinegar, that's okay, you're giving something better. But to give vinegar for wine is not right. But if you did it, it's a good truma, it's b'di'evid. And our question is why only b'di'evid? If the Rabbanan hold min echadu, that this is one commodity. Vinegar is old wine. But it's one commodity. If it's one commodity, why can't you do it lechatchila? Why can't I say I've got a batch of wine and vinegar? I'm going to give the vinegar to the Kohen, and that will be the truma for everything. We'll understand from further on in the Gemara. Let's learn the next piece of Gemara. So the Gemara wants to suggest that our Mishnah must be going like Rebbe, who says wine and vinegar are two commodities, not like the Rabbanan, who say they're one commodity. Answers the Gemara, afilu temer Rabbanan. No, we can even say this is going like the Rabbanan. Even the Rabbanan who say in matters of commerce, this is one commodity. Here, ad kan lo pligi Rabbanan ale de Rebbe ela le'inyan meiser utruma. This argument between the Rabbanan and Rebbe, whether it's one commodity or two commodities, that's talking about truma. It's not talking about commerce. And when it comes to commerce, the Rabbanan agree these are two different commodities. It's only by truma. Uche de Rabbi Ilo, like Rabbi Ilo, de Omer Rabbi Ilo, minayin l'toreh min hara'a al hayafa, shetrumato truma. Where do we learn from that if you have a batch, and part of the batch is poor quality, and part of the batch is good quality, that if you give the Kohen the poor quality, it's truma. It's not the greatest thing to do, but it's truma. Shenema v'lo tisu alav chet b'harimchem et chelbo mimenu, because it says, and if you take the chelev, if you take from the good part of the meat and you give it to the truma, then there will be no sin. If it doesn't work, why would there be a question of possible sin? Mikan l'torei min hara'a al hayafa shetrumato truma. We learn from here that if you give truma from poor quality, you give the poor quality in order to be able to eat the better quality which you've kept for yourself, the truma is valid. But when it comes to commodity trading, there are some people who want wine, there are some people who want vinegar. There's some people who trade in vinegar, some who trade in wine, and they want that specifically. So it doesn't help if in a contract I contract to sell you wine and you deliver vinegar, or I contract to sell vinegar and you give me wine. If I'm a vinegar trader, I don't want the wine. Therefore, in commerce, these are two different commodities. There's a beautiful sequence of Rishonim, which we don't have time to go into, but I've brought them down. The Ramban launches it with his kasha. The Ramban asks the question, if you look at this Gemara and you simply delete the part that refers to Rabbi Ilo, what would be missing? So what would the Gemara look like if we delete the part with Rabbi Ilo? So then the Gemara would ask, our Mishnah says if you contract for wine and you deliver vinegar, or you contract for vinegar and you deliver wine, either can back out, the contract is null and void. Says the Gemara, that must be like the Rebbe, because the Rabbanan say when it comes to Truma and Meiser, the Rabbanan say it's all one commodity. If it's all one commodity in Truma and Meiser, certainly it would be so with commodities as well. Answers the Gemara, no, commodity is different from Truma and Meiser. Truma and Meiser, we go after what it's called and what it is, but when it comes to commodity, we go after intention. And we're dealing with trading. What did the parties intend when they contracted? If the intention was specifically wine or specifically vinegar, and I deliver something different from what I contracted, the contract is null and void. What do we need the piece of Rabbi Eloi for? What does that bring in? That's the Ramban's kasha. And the Ramban answers it, and the Ran explains it. The Ran, don't forget, is the Talmud of the Ramban. The Ramban's Talmud is the Rashbo, the Rashbo's Talmud is the Ran, and the Ran explains the Ramban, and they learn from this Rabbi Eloi, they learn that even l'chatchila, you can do it. I might have thought that it's, as we learnt in the Rashbam, I might have thought that you shouldn't really give vinegar out of a batch of wine. But if you did, it's good truma. And we learn from Rabbi Lapin, no, you can even do it lechatchila. You can do it deliberately. You can start off that way. It's a specific case where there's a gzeres hakosiv that you can do it. The Ritvo learns differently. The Ritvo is also a talmid of the Talmud. He's also a talmid of the Rashba, a talmid of the Talmud of the Ramban. But the Ritvo, we've often talked about how he has a very original way of learning and of understanding always. And so here too, he departs from the Ramban and the Ran's approach, and he learns exactly the opposite. He learns that clearly yain and chometz, wine and vinegar, are two different commodities. If they were not two different commodities, our Mishnah wouldn't make any sense. Then if I contract for wine and I deliver vinegar, the fact that the contract is void means they're two different commodities. So what about Trumas and Maisa? Trumas and Maisa we learn from Rabbi Eloi only that b'di'evet it's okay. It's a gzeres hakosuf. The Torah says this is an exception. Although wine and vinegar are technically two different commodities, if b'di'evet, if you've already done it and you gave truma, you gave vinegar for wine, if you gave wine for vinegar, there's no problem. But if you gave vinegar for wine, then b'di'evet, if you've already done it, your truma is truma. There's a chet, there's sin in that, it's not a good thing to do. But b'di'evet it works, b'di'evet it's good. So the Ritvo says at the end, Lachi Ashwinan, Devadai Kepeda Gemurahi, Ela Dahatam Sharinan Le b'di'evet, Migzerat HaKatuv V'nosei Alav Chet. So the Ritvo teaches us how the Rashbam came to say this is only b'di'evet. That lechatchila you shouldn't do that, but b'di'evet migzeres hakosav v'nosei alav chet. If it's done, it's done. But the important principle is that wine and vinegar are two separate commodities. Even though the one develops into the other, you start with wine and the wine becomes vinegar. So nothing's changed. It's just it's not the content hasn't changed. It's just the way the chemicals react with one another that's trained. You've got a fermentation that takes place that shouldn't be taking place. So there's a chemical reaction that's causing it, but it's the same goods, it's the same material. And just as you can have good apples and bad apples, you can have good wheat and bad wheat. And there's no question that you can give ma'aser from one to the other. Maybe vinegar is just bad wine. The Gemara says, no, vinegar is not bad wine. Vinegar is different from wine altogether. It's a different commodity. And it's in that difference. So there's beautiful lomdas. If anybody is listening, has the opportunity to learn through the Ramban carefully, the Ran and the Ritvo, and understand the Rashbam from that, and see how the Rambam paskins like the Ritvo, and so does the Shulchan Aruch paskin that way. So the psak halacha is that there's no question that wine and vinegar are two different commodities for everything. It's just there's a special concession, like gzeres hakosov, that in the case of truma, b'di'evet, if you've already done it, then it will be considered truma, although that's not the ideal. I was reflecting on this a lot and thinking about this wine and vinegar, and the Gemara in Megillah kept on coming to mind. The Gemara says, when Yosef sent to his father, Ul Aviv shalach kazot esrim chamarim nosim mituv Mitzrayim, and for his father, he sent 20 donkey loads of the best of Egypt to his father. What's the best of Egypt? Asks the Gemara, my mituv Mitzrayim. What did he send his father? What could his father want from Mitzrayim? A new set of Shas? What would he get? A set of Rambam? What's he going to get from Mitzrayim, from Egypt? Oh, Amar Rabbi Binyonim Ba'yafet, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shalach lo yayin yashan. He sent him very old, amazing wine. You would think, what does Yaakov care? Yaakov cares about wine. We see from there that yes, there is value in that, but there's a deeper value. Why? Shidad zakenim nocha himenu. Old people get a lot of pleasure from good wine. And I've always taught this to mean the reason they get a lot of pleasure is because it gives them a message. Wine improves with age. And so do people. It doesn't mean because the society tends to devalue the aged. And when you look at wine and you realize that there are some things that just get better and better with age. And it makes the older person feel respected, feel valued in his understanding that that's wine. And Yosef, sending this to his father, sends a message to his father. You, father, have just become greater and greater in my eyes, in everybody's eyes, like a great wine, like the wine I'm sending you from Mitzrayim. But wine can also become vinegar. So now the question is, people are the same. People can age and become amazing wine. They can become better than they ever were. If you look at the Gedolei Yisrael, in their older years, they were hundreds of times better than they were when they were younger. All the knowledge, all the wisdom, all the experience, the life experience, all built into that. And so much of what we have is from their older years. And yet, a person can become vinegar also. A person can age, can become, God forbid, senile. And even if he doesn't become senile, he becomes ineffective. He sits on the beach and looks out at the ocean, and that becomes his old age. What is the difference? What does it mean? We see over here that old wine and vinegar are not the same commodity. Vinegar is not old wine. Vinegar is not something else. Whether a person ages as old wine or ages like vinegar depends on what is done during his life. Somebody gave us a wonderful bottle of very old wine not so long ago. And in opening it, I remember saying to the people at our table, I'm opening this wine. It's either going to be unbelievable or it's going to be awful. It depends what it was to start with. If it was a good wine and it's been stored well, it'll be amazing. If it isn't, it's going to be vinegary, because that's what happens to wine that isn't good. The same with people. If a person starts off good and stores him or herself well, then they just get better and better. What does it mean, storing well? Storing well is what's inside, not what's outside. It's not the bottle. What's important is how you've looked after what's inside the bottle. If one spent one's life polishing the bottle and not worrying about the wine, then the wine will become vinegar. And the old person who has become vinegar is not an improved version of the young person. It's not an improvement over time. It's a different commodity. And how often does it happen? You meet an older person, you say, my goodness, I knew you when you were younger. You were a vibrant, bright, incredible person. Now you're a bit of an alter kaka. You're unrecognizable because they've allowed themselves to deteriorate. It doesn't have to deteriorate with age, God forbid, with the exception of where disease causes that deterioration. But without that, an older person develops and grows. That's a zaken, a zaken means somebody who has integrated wisdom into their being, into their inner lives. They've spent their lives developing their interior, not just their exterior. A good bottle of wine is when you take care of what's inside the bottle, not when you take care of the bottle. If a person spent his life just taking care of the bottle, his physical appearance and his physical strength, and that's all that the focus has been on, and his physical accomplishments, and he's ignored the wine inside him, that becomes vinegar. And although the Chachomim say it's min echod, that's only the Gabi Meiser, and that's because of the Gzeras HaKosov. But clearly in the essence of what they are, the way we paskin, is yain and chometz. These are two completely different things. An old person who has aged gracefully and with wisdom is not the same kind of old person as one who has not. One can't just put them into the same category. How do you treat the aged? It depends. There's one way to treat the vinegar old people, and there's one way to treat the wine old people. People who spent their lives maturing their wine, they become great wine, and there's one way to treat them. That's the way we have to treat a zaken. And the other way, sometimes there's a person who's become vinegar. Still, it's a different commodity. It has value. There are some people who want vinegar. It's not that an old person who has life experience but doesn't have chokhmah, it doesn't mean he has no value. He has an enormous amount of value. He's had a lot of life experience. But you can't compare it to the person who has spent his life taking care to preserve his interiority, to develop and build that which is inside him and become greater and greater as he becomes older and older.